Great day, learners. Welcome to CPRT42 Module II topic. So this topic is actually entitled Ecological and Economic Concepts of Weeds. I am Miss Bethel Grace P. Tabin-Paclar, and I am tasked to discuss this Module 2. So let's get started. This module is comprised of sections: the definition of the weeds, the importance of the weeds, weed crop competition, and reflections of the war of weeds. So let's have a working definition of a weed, tackle the harmful and beneficial effects of weeds, discuss about the CTL or the critical threshold level, what are some yield losses due to weeds, and when do these weeds become a problem, for our part or for our end. So these are the learning objectives for this specific module. So in this learning module, you as the learner is expected to know the definition of weeds, realize its importance, and understand some of the ecological factors that would actually help us in strategizing what's the best control measures for this specific. So accordingly, weeds are a constant fact of life in most vegetable crops. Thereby, it is actually imperative to acquire an ecological understanding of weeds. Defining weeds as it is the foundation of an effective management program. Or to be more specific, we need to define weeds for us to craft an effective weed management program. And this effective management program could actually help us identify or create a line between success and failure. So the word weed has been defined as what? Unwanted, undesirable. It grows in places it is undesirable. It has harmful effects that actually exceed its beneficial effects. It actually interferes with human activities or our activities, just like farming. And this weed is actually having this love-hate relationship with the farmer or the grower. And for some, weeds are actually useless. So the term typically applies to any plant, or the term weed is actually applicable to any plant species that actually often becomes a pest. However, I would like to also reiterate that there are many weed species that are considered as food, as forage, as cover plant, or even there are cases wherein weeds are actually considered as volunteer crops. So let me have an example of what this volunteer crop is all about. So a volunteer crop, for example, it could be a corn or even a forage soybean. They can become weeds. They are actually a crop, but they can actually become a weed when they self-seed and they emerge in another part of crop rotation where they are no longer wanted. So for example, if the area is actually intended for the cultivation of peanut, and then you notice there a single corn plant growing or corn crop growing in the peanut field, then we could actually consider this corn plant as a volunteer plant. Thereby, it's a weed because it's actually out of place. It's unwanted in that area. It's undesirable in that area because that area is initially intended for the production of this legume called peanut. Apparently, no, what can we reflect upon that specific example that I have given to you? Even the most highly valuable forage, no, or hay crops, or it could be the most valuable food crop, can become a weed in an area it is unwanted or undesired, or that area which is originally not intended for the growth of that specific plant species. So again, when we try to think of or check on the bigger picture, defining a weed is actually dependent on who's actually going to define the term, or it's from person to person basis, or from case basis. So from the examples that I mentioned a while ago, it becomes obvious that the term weed is in part, quote unquote, a human value judgment of certain plant species or plants as interfering with the desired use of a particular field or tract, or it could be land, no? At a specific or at a particular time. So now, since we know that what might be a weed for me may not be a weed for you, no, your definition of the weed might entirely be different from my definition of a weed. Of course, one of the many factors that contribute to that is our own encounter or own experience with this plant species. As to the question, why is there a need for us to define weeds? Then, according to Altieri and Sullivan, no, successful weed control or managing the land's natural weed response to cultivation begins with an ecological understanding of weeds and their roles in the farm or the garden ecosystem. Definitely, without us having a clear understanding of what a weed is, it's hard for us to control them. So it always starts with the idea of proper definition of this weed, and then the next step is for us to create a successful control, measure, or practice. So any vegetation, let me reiterate, that comes up in a garden or field that the farmer or the grower did not plant is collectively called as a weed, whether or not it is causing a problem. Yun po yung reality. However, if we try to eradicate all of this, what we call volunteer vegetation, is complicated. So managing a weed species to protect the desired crops or the crops which we are actually cultivating for economic purposes, it does not require exterminating or eradicating all the weeds together. So based on this, a weed must be defined as any plant not intentionally sown or propagated by the grower that requires management to prevent it from interfering with crop or livestock production. Another definition is its presence may not always be harmful and does not automatically warrant its immediate eradication. And the last one is a weed is considered a non-crop plant that become a pest if not managed adequately. So from this definition, one could actually see that the presence of a weed in a specific area does not at all warranty no, automatic control measure. And more so, it does not warranty total eradication or extermination of that weed species. We're only going to have a combination of the different control measures no, if and only if the weed is already considered a nuisance, it actually is beyond the critical threshold level or the point where it can cause yield losses or economic no, losses to our crops of interest. So most the weed, this is another um, idea of what is this weed no all about. So we have already defined that it's a plant out of place, that it's these weeds are unwanted, they are useless, no, and they actually effectively compete, no, with our crops of interest or our desired crops. For what? For space, for nutrients, for sunlight and water, no, sunlight or solar radiation and water, and that they interfere with human activities, mm, specifically with agricultural operation. And one of the negative effects of the presence of these weeds, especially if they are already unmanaged, then they could actually reduce the yield, no, and the quality of the produce. And we could not also blame, no, why are these weeds present in the field? Bakit nga ba andyan sila? Sino yung may salarin? Because from the moment that people started doing agriculture, weeds have already existed. So from the earliest periods of their existence, no, our forefathers or the primitive farmer already had tried to pull out no, these weeds by hand. And we can also check on the trends no, from manual labor, since manual labor is already scarce today. So some of the farmers consider it as an economical because of the cost and that the duration of the time it would take one farmer to finish actually uprooting the weed that he or she can see in a field, especially if it's massive acreage of land. So from manual labor to chemical weed control. So it's actually progressing, and the progress is actually accelerating. No? It's accelerating rate under such situations, which is actually inclining to the use of herbicide no, as forefront in the recent years. But then again, if you could still remember in your M1 in IPM, the use of herbicide is actually the less reverse. So most of the weeds complete their life cycle within a very short time as compared to the crops in which they coexist with. So losses caused by these weeds exceed the losses from any other agricultural pest. So what I wanted you to put in mind is when we talk about weeds, it's considered the most destructive, thereby it's the costliest agricultural pest. So it is estimated that among the annual agricultural loss, please take note of the statistics, weeds account for 45%, insects only 30%, diseases around 20%, and other pests about 5%. Thus, of the four groups, no, of the agricultural pests, the greatest losses are caused by these weeds. That's why you have this weed science. And as I talking earlier, that the most successful weed control measures should always start or commence with a thorough understanding of what a weed is. That's why it's a must that you must be able to define a weed. Now, what are these weeds doing in our field? You said, ma'am, that these weeds are actually part already of agriculture because our primitive farmer, ever since they started doing agriculture, they start cultivating the land, weeds are there. No, I wanted to share to you that bare soil is hungry and at risk. No, bare soil, yung soil talaga, yung lupain walang tanim, walang crops of interest, walang weeds. It means it's actually a signal that that soil is actually hungry and at risk. The soil life, most especially that most of our crops are grown terrestrially, the soil life is so vital to soil fertility. So if the soil is dead, then of course we could not say that that soil is fertile. No? It goes to show that it's hungry because of the normal influx of nourishing organic compounds that are supposedly coming from plant roots, no? Pwede din from any other leaf litters or parts of the plant that nahuhulog po dun sa lupa. So, try to imagine if the soil is bare. Ayan. So, it will be exposed. And once it's exposed, it's actually prone to soil erosion caused by rain, by water in general, or even by wind. Especially if the root systems have also been removed or disrupted. Definitely, what are the weeds doing in our fields? Weeds are nature's way of covering the soil that has become exposed by fire, by flood, by landslide, due to clear cutting, clean tillage, or other disturbance or pests. So in agriculture class, we have this what we call the fallow period. Not the FOLLOW, but the FALLOW. Meaning we allow the soil to rest. And allowing the soil to rest means we're not going to use it for annual crop cultivation. We're allowing it to rest, and we also account that there will be weeds growing in that area, and once weeds would actually grow, they would also develop. Then we would also try to figure after one cropping season, and we're going to plow back those weeds to the soil para they will become organic matter. So in that way, from the definition of weeds which are basically negative, then we check on the bright light, the bright side, no? Going back to that main idea that lahat naman ng nabubuhay dito sa mundo, merong siniserve na purpose. Kasama na doon yung ating mga weeds. So when somebody would ask you, anong ginagawa ng weeds din sa area nyo? Or dun sa lupain nyo? Sabihin mo, yan yung isa sa mga paraan ng ating environment or ng ating nature para hindi maging at risk yung soil life or yung soil health based on purpose. Let's proceed with the importance of weeds. Okay, so talking about the importance, we've learned that there is a positive connotation and a negative connotation kung ano nga ba yung ating weed. Ngayon naman, alam na natin that these weeds have certain effects in agriculture. Right? Kaya nga, isa ito sa kino-consider natin na costliest agricultural pest. Kasi merong epekto yung ating weeds sa pang-agrikultura or sa agricultural activities na ginagawa natin. Ayan. So these are mostly in the form of different harmful results. So commonly daw pala sa agriculture, medyo leaning towards negative yung impact ng weeds. Ayan. But I would like to reiterate again that there are also some beneficial effects of weeds. So let's start muna with the harmful effects of weeds. So we're going to divide it into harmful and beneficial. And talking about the harmful, divide din naman natin yung ating topic into the direct losses caused by weeds and the indirect causes or indirect losses caused by these weeds. So yung unang-una na bakit ayaw ng mga farmers natin sa weeds? Because weeds can cause reduction no, in crop yield. So it actually, especially when they are unmanaged, they might reduce the yield no, of our agricultural commodity. So weeds can cause this yield because based on what I've told you in our previous discussion, that or even your other teachers discussed with you, no, in your previous classes, that these weeds and our crops of interest are belonging to the same kingdom, the kingdom plantain. Since they belong to the same kingdom, the reality is they have the same needs for growth, for survival, for reproduction. So what are these needs, these essential needs? And take note, class, these needs are actually limited. So there is what we call competition. So competition in terms of, we have here the sun, so the solar radiation, of water, of essential nutrient, diba? Water is a nutrient itself, of space, ano pa ba? Of other inputs, no? That are actually applied by farmer, such as fertilizer and other supplements, which are originally intended for the crops of interest. But then again, the weeds are present. So they would what? Compete. Ha? Nakikipag-agawan din sila dun sa ating crops of interest. And if the recommendation rate of the area, no, in relation to the number of crop species, for example, you're going to plant corn, and alam mo na yung population density ng corn doon sa isang hectare ng lupain. Tapos ang nirecommend ay 150 and 300p and 200k. Yun po ay budget para sa ating crops of interest. Pero andun si weed eh. So ano naman gagawin ni weed? Gusto niya ding mabuhay. No? Meron din silang coping mechanism for survival, for growth. So, they would compete na yung budget na yun, yung 150, 300, 200, makikinabang din sila. So, dahil supposedly para kay crops of interest yun, nabigyan ng portion si weed, pwede na maka-decline yun ng yield. Okay, especially no, when this weed is becoming invasive and uncontrolled. Mind you, statistics would say that an uncontrolled weed infestation, we call it weed infestation, can lead to 95% yield losses. So, paano na lang yan? No? 5% lang yung mga harvest mo. These are actual statistics. 95% yield losses in cassava. 40% yield losses in maize. 53% yield losses in cowpea, in some other legumes such as soybean and pigeon pea. So kung ikaw si farmer, gusto mo ba ng ganun? Ang mahal-mahal na ng fertilizers ngayon and other inputs, no? Even the pesticides, or to be more specific, the herbicide. Tapos ganun pa kababa yung mga harvest mo kasi napakataas ng yield losses due to weeds. Alright, no. And then, another harmful effect of weed is that weeds can reduce the quality of the harvested agricultural products. Kaya nga, nalagyan ko dyan ng ICAS yung best quality. Of course, the Philippines is aiming for sustainability, for agricultural security, for food security, no? For nutrition security. So, hindi lang po pala dapat quantity yung ating target. We should also ensure that every time we would do farming, we're also having the best quality. Diba? So, these weeds would actually interfere with a lot of harvest operations and can increase the cost of harvesting in both smallholder and even large-scale farms. So you would notice no, the presence of these weeds could actually affect the quality in terms of pwede kasi na yung weed natin, sila yung nagiging bahay ng mga pathogens at ng mga insekto. And in return, these pathogens and insects could actually cause the vegetation and decline in the quality of the produce. Pwedeng may rotting, pwedeng may weevils, dahil originally yung habitat ng mga insekto or yung mga pathogens na ito ay yung weeds na naandun sa ating area. So if we're going to control the population of those weeds, which actually serve as a habitat for these pathogens and insects that could cause harm in the quality of our produce, then ibig sabihin, pwede na natin na-improve. Ayun, yung kalidad ng ating mga produkto. Another harmful effect of weed is that weeds may be poisonous to animals, such as for the case of some amaranthus species, which can adversely affect livestock because of the high nitrate content of the shoots. So I uploaded here, I shared here pala, a screen cap of a journal article that talks about poisoning in cattle, a case report about poisoning in cattle caused by red root pigweed. So if you wanted to read the entire journal or paper, below the picture of this pigweed is the link. So what was the conclusion of that study? This is the first case of poisoning of cattle in Amaranthus retroflexus. This was reported in Slovenia. Poisoning with this plant is probably caused by the combination of unknown nephrotoxic agent, nitrate and oxalate. So, different species of Amaranthus are used as ornamental or forage plants. But this specific species, the retroflexus, is a common weed, in Slovenia, and due to a lack of knowledge in people, it is possible that more cases of poisoning in cattle will occur in the future. So that's one of the many harmful effects of weeds. It could cause poisoning in animals, especially when they are eaten. And then the cost of controlling weeds is actually high. So it would increase the production cost of our farmers. So a recent study, conducted by the Virginia Polytechnic University educators, actually sheds light on the true cost of no-till weed control. So beside pala of looking at herbicide costs, the study also took a close look at the role that manure application rates have in determining the weed control measures. Or what they were saying is that meron din palang, this is actually a study about no-till farmer or no-till farming. So the data was collected from 143 fields. Corn po yung kanilang itinanim, tapos 36 farmers po yung included sa kanilang study, and they were actually analyzed, results were analyzed by extensionists. So na-find out nila that weed control cost an average of $51.95 for no-tilled ground po yun. And even it could reach as high as $48.43 for tilled ground. So if we're going to convert it to peso, so 51.95, magkano na ba yung dollar peso exchange ngayon? So ganun kalaki. Yun po yung Sa corn pa lang po ito at marami pa pong examples na nagpapahiwatig na talagang nakakapag-cause na nagiging mataas yung production cost ng ating crops of interest dahil sa presence ng weeds. So it actually adds to the burdens of the farm. And the presence of weeds also can impede water flow in irrigation canals. And the presence of this various weeds in lakes and reservoirs can actually increase loss of water by transpiration. So if you check on these pictures that I shared with you, no, nakikita natin na yung ating irrigation canal, medyo hindi na maganda yung daloy. And also, because of these different kinds of weeds that are present, may hamper some of the agricultural activity, and in terms of physiology, can actually cause loss of water by transpiration because another plant species or a plant species is actually growing in that specific water. So of course, they are weeds. And weeds serve as alternate hosts to many animal pests, such as insects, rodents, birds, And these insects, rodents, and birds could attack our crops of interest. So, ayun, meron po akong isang study dito. So, this is one example of indirect losses caused by weed. So, seeds of weeds as an alternative host of phytopathogens. So, ano ba yung result ng study na to? Weeds are a dissemination vehicle and provide alternative hosts of phytopathogenic fungi of this specific genera. Meron po ditong Fusarium, meron din po ditong Phytium, Genera, ano ba to? Ito yung mga disease-causing mga genera ng fungi. Ayan. So, saan ba natin ito makikita? Normally, naninirahan po sila sa mga weeds. So, inaatake. At dahil andun yung weeds na yon ay makikita natin sa field ng rice, sa field ng string beans, sa field ng soybean, sa field ng corn. Andun yung mga weeds na ito. Tapos, ito palang weeds na ito ay nagiging tirahan ng Fusarium species. So, ano yung mangyayari? Sila yung dissemination vehicle. Tapos, ang mangyayari, magpaparami doon yung mga phytopathogenic na microorganisms na ito, aatakihin nila yung ating crops of incidence. Ayun, yun po yung hindi gusto. And the presence of weeds imposes a limit on farm size. Now, supposedly, the area is solely allocated for our crops of interest. But again, weeds are living in that specific area. So, it limits the size of the farm. So here's another study entitled Weeds as Agricultural Constraint to Farmers in Benin, Results of Diagnostic Study. So the conclusion of this study was that specific participatory diagnostic study clearly showed that farmers in Benin perceive weeds and lack of appropriate weed management strategies as major constraints on crop production, and that population pressure on available and insufficient arable land aggravates the problems. Yan po. Medyo, yung totoo nga, limited na yung arable agricultural land, plus pinamamahayan pa ito ng ating weeds. So, mas lalong uunti yung space na dapat sanay para lamang sa ating agricultural crops of interest. And madami pa pong magiging ibang problema pag ganun yung nangyari. Insufficient pa yung land, insufficient pa yung resources, meron pang weeds, meron pang lack of labor. So ano na lang, pwedeng mangutang na lang yung ating mga farmers. So yun yung indirect loss by weeds. And the presence of weeds can also reduce the economic value of lakes, or any other bodies of water, especially if that specific body of water is for tourist purposes. Yan. Because they could prevent or limit fishing activities. So we have here an example, no? Water, this is actually the invasion of water hyacinth. Oh, water hyacinth is called the world's worst water weed. No, it's becoming invasive in the lake, no? Lake Tanganyika. Because this Lake Tanganyika is actually considered as an African Great Lake. It is the second oldest freshwater lake in the world. The second largest by volume and the second deepest. So kasi nga second largest siya tapos napaka-invasive pa ng water hyacinth. So the real deal is mas madami ding area na pwedeng i-invade ng water hyacinth na ito. So how can you present something that is becoming ugly, right? These weeds are considered as an eyesore in that specific lake. So how can you do fishing activities? How can you actually encourage tourists to visit that lake if it's already infested with this? Another is weeds such as our Impirata cylindrica becomes a fire hazard in dry season, especially throughout the savanna vegetation zone. So I uploaded here I shared here a link rather. You could access the link and read on cogon grass fires, or the Impirata cylindrica, because this is actually considered as an invasive threat in Alabama and even throughout the southeastern United States. So what could happen? Kasi it's dry season, so ang nangyayari, nagda-dry up din yung mga weeds na ito. And then, yung ating ding mga kahoy na andun, medyo deficient din sila with water, nagda-dry up din sila. So, ano yung nangyayari? Pwedeng magkaroon ng forest fire caused by the presence of this cogon grass. Kasi dun magsa-start yung spark, yung ignition. Another indirect losses caused by weeds is that weeds affect health of human beings. By how? We have this weed called stinging nettle. So itong stinging nettle na to, pwedeng makakause ng skin rashes. Ayan. Other weeds are also associated with allergies, sa human beings. So we have allergenicity. Some of the people are actually allergic to the pollen, or the dapaw or the trichomes that are actually found in these weeds, thereby affecting our health. And what would happen if you're asthmatic and there are a lot of weeds in the area and it's already the reproductive stage, so they would really shed off pollen. So it would trigger your asthma. Ayan. Kaya nga diba yung iba, pagka madaming weeds or even madaming pollen doon sa area na yon, if asthmatic, hindi ina-advise na pupunta doon. Baka kasi maka-trigger ng asthma, maaaring ikamatay. So there are actually various weed species which are actually posing allergens to human beings, or mga katul-katul or rashes, or worse comes to worse, because of the rash that's already present, it would develop into skin. Weeds also impair visibility along roads and railway lines. So if you have noticed in this picture, I've got this from Railroad Vegetation Management, a crucial cleanup service that keeps our train system alive. So though here in Mindanao, we haven't have our railroad system, but maybe in the near future, But you would notice in some areas of the country or even other parts of the countries, of the world in which na ay mga countries na daghan o trains, uncontrolled weed growth reduces the value of rather not the value, would actually impede the visibility, or impair, that's the most appropriate term, visibility of the driver. Kasi hindi ninyo nakikita saan na ba dito, lalo na panggabi. So it might cause accidents, no? It's dangerous as well. It can kill lives because of the presence of this weeds. And also, uncontrolled weed growth reduces the value of real estates. So, ngayong panahon na to, flourishing po yung real estates. No? Gustong magkabahay, so kuha ka na lang. So, between these two features, saan mo ba gustong tumira? Of course, dito sa lawn na maganda yung landscape compared dito sa picture na nasa right na weedy. And it matters even though both of the houses are concrete, huh? Both of our houses are fully furnished, but it matters. It would really affect the quality, rather the price, no, of this house and lot because of the presence of these weeds that would actually mean na pwedeng bababa din yung value kasi medyo hindi ata to masyadong pinagtuunan ng pansin, no? Itong real estate na ito, baka wala silang proper maintenance sa kanilang landscape. So, hindi ako dito. And then, in situations where farmers depend on human labor for weeding, specifically child labor, so children must miss school at peak of weeding periods. So, pag baga na yung mga sagbot, of course, this is seasonal. No, absent ang mga bata, mga estudyante. So this reduces the quality of education that these children can get during their early years. And remember, this early childhood education is one of the many foundations, no? Para mas brighter ang ilang future. And this is actually evident in our country, the Philippines. So this is one of the many indirect losses caused